Everyone, as there's so many of you turned out for the meeting, we just set up another room, and when we're ready, we'll start slightly past 6 o'clock. Okay.
Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for the delay in starting the meeting. As you'll be aware, we have quite a few members of the public attending, so we just had to set up the overflow room in the council chamber down the hall. So that's why we've been delayed, just getting that sorted out. So we're all ready now, Chair. We've tested so that all members in the other room can hear, and we're live online.
Thank you, Robert, and good evening to everybody. I've never seen so many people before back in the good old days of Tiptree applications. Please keep your brollies to yourself this time, I think. So good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. I am Councillor Michael Lilly, Chair of the Planning Committee, and I'll be chairing this meeting. To begin the meeting, there are matters of housekeeping. Action in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and into the car park behind the town hall in St Runmold Street. This meeting is being live streamed to the council's YouTube page and will be available after the meeting. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants please mute the microphones when not speaking. Introductions. Members of the committee and officers will introduce themselves, starting from my left.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Lynn Barton, Shrub End Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Helen Chua, St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End Ward.
Hello, everyone. I'm Councillor Chris Pearson, Labour Councillor for Beachurch.
Sam McLean, Councillor for Newtown and Christchurch.
Good evening, Nigel Chapman, Rural North Ward.
Good evening, Jackie McLean, Markstown Lair Ward.
Councillor Robert Davidson for Mersey and Pyfleet Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Lee Tate for Prettygate Ward.
Good evening, James Ryan, Planning Manager at Colchester City Council.
Good evening, Simon Cairns, Development Manager, Colchester City. Thank you.
Robert Carmichael, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, everyone. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. We may have a break at 8 o'clock, subject to the items remaining. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room. Whilst determination of a plan application is not a quasi-judicial process, unlike certain licensing functions carried out by the local authority, it is a formal administrative process involving the application of national and local policies. Reference to legislation and case law, as well as rules of procedure, rights of appeal, and an expectation that people will act reasonably and fairly. All involved in these decisions should remember that the possibility that an aggrieved party may seek a judicial review and or complain to the Ombudsman on grounds of maladministration or a breach of the authority's code. Item 2, substitutes. What substitutes have we got for tonight, members?
Yes, Chairman, I'm substituting for councillor Mannion from Tiptree.
And any others? Yes, there are.
Sorry, I'm substituting for Martin Warnes.
Thank you. So it's councillor Davison for councillor Mannion and councillor McLean for councillor Warnes. Urgent items, any urgent items, Robert?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest, members? Councillor Davison.
Just to say, I have a non-pecuniary interest in that I'm a farmer. So I may have interest in land, but not this land.
Okay, so I think we'll get clarity now over that.
Thank you, Chair. You don't necessarily need to declare that, councillor, but it will be kept on the record just for posterity.
Jackie, please.
I was going to declare the same. There's a wee farm in this area.
You're a farmer in the same area as well. Thank you. That's noted as well. Have your say. If anyone has a petition they wish to present to me on any of the items on the agenda this evening, please do so now. No petition. There are no minutes for approval of the meeting. I'll have your say. So we'll actually move on now to the main committee. We have one item tonight, 7.1, and that's 222151, land to the northwest of Hardy's Green, Birch. We have some speakers. We have public against Graham Barney, and then public for Ed Perrin. We also have Visiting Ward Councillor Andrew Ellis, and a statement will be read by the County Councillor, I believe it's the County Councillor there, and he's also a ward member as well, by Councillor Kevin Bentley, which will be read out by Robert Carmichael. So now we'll move on to the main bit of the night. We have James Ryan to present the application. James, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, members, and good evening, members of the public. I'll just share my screen. So tonight we are here to look at item 7.1 only, and that's application 222151, construction operation of a solar farm, associated infrastructure, including a battery area, inverters, security cameras, fencing, access tracks, landscaping, and a cable run. That is a red line plan for the site. It's a bit grainy because it's so large, but this is the site here. Just about make it out on my cursor. It's the main site, and then the red line follows along there, which is the cable run connecting into the road approximately here. We'll run along the road in a trench to the Aberton substation. Got another picture, another drawing a little bit later, but you'll see where the consented layer solar farm is around about here. So the cable will effectively hit the existing cable and won't go any further than that. So there's no concerns about the road being dug up twice. They're using the same cable run in effect. Some very basic drawings. None of the drawings I'm about to show you are suggested as approved drawings. These are all entirely indicative. They're just some indicative images of what the on-site infrastructure will be. This is one of the substation rooms, one of the battery containers with the little ventilation areas there. That's a plan view. That's in elevational view. So effectively shipping containers. On the substation elevations, example of the fencing. So this is the mesh deer fencing with little gaps for small mammals, CCTV camera on a pole, trench profile, section of the some of the access tracks, permeable, another stock-proof fence image. That is an inverter. So it's another inverters are located within shipping containers as well. Another basic plant drawing. Another one, inverter transformer inverter inside a shipping container. Indicative panel drawing, as I set out, this is not fixed and this is not an approved drawing, but these are the maximum dimensions they would be. So 3 meters high, they're likely to be a little bit lower than 3 meters, but 3 meters to the top edge, 900 mils to the bottom edge. That's a metering kiosk. Some basic elevations of what the substation will potentially look like. What the battery area will look like. Oh, there's a bund around that. Just highlight that there. You'll see that on the larger drawing in a minute, but there's an earth bund around it. This would be one of the approved drawings. This is the development zones. So you can see there's 5 development zones laid out, and you'll note the red line is significantly larger than the development zones. That's because the application was amended throughout the application period to remove. There were 3 zones across here, 3 fields and 3 southern fields. They've been removed throughout the application period, so no development. And there's a condition suggested to condition no development in those zones. So here's an indicative layout. It is only indicative. There's a condition to be discharged or set up the precise locations of the panels in terms of layout and exactly what the metering equipment and inverters, etc., will appear like. But this is an indicative drawing to give members a flavour of what's being approved. This area here is woodland. Another block of woodland here. We saw these on site today. The main access is taken here through the farmyard that we went to. We stood roughly here. Is that showing up? Yeah. So that'll be the access, and that'll also be the access for the district network operator. They'll come in this way down here and access the substation here for when they need to visit for any maintenance purposes. There is also an additional access at that field access. That was the second port of call that we went to down the eastern elevation. Oh, sorry, the eastern side of the development. This is a drawing just showing the other solar farm. There's the layer solar farm there. This site, cable run, and other Birch Airfield solar farm and the Birch Gravel Pit solar farm, which are already in situ. That's the landscaping drawing, just showing the additional landscaping. I showed some members this on site, but you can see there's going to be some additional hedge planting, wildflower meadows around the margins, blocks of woodland here and here to preserve the setting of the listed building. Another block of woodland going in here. These are the existing woodland blocks. I think we could appreciate on site today that the substation and battery compound will be very well screened in its existing position, but there's still additional planting proposed. These are the 3 parcels in pink that have been removed from the scheme since the application was submitted. This is a bridle way that runs along the southern boundary, and that is a public footpath running north in that pink line there. Cable run will terminate, will exit the site in this corner here and head off on its way. So I've got some photo montage images for you. Some are a wireframe, some are photo montage at completion of development and at 10 years, depending on the distance in effect. So this is taken from the east. So on Birch Road east of the site, we stood at a site close to this, and below there you can see the wireframe, so it's pretty distant. And that's at completion. You may just be able to make out the panels in the background, but they're beyond that field. So that's with the existing hedge line in place. And then that's after 10 years with the additional hedge planting. So very well screened. This is a wireline drawing from Hoggett's farm. We actually stood along here. We just passed Hoggett's farm when we got out. today, and that's facing kind of northeast, with the wire line showing it's very distant. This is from Mulberry Green, so that was where we kind of veered. We were travelling south and we veered left. So that's the wire line drawing showing where the panels will be going. That's a photo montage, so you can see the panels is at completion before the landscaping goes in. You can see these panels here and beyond the existing hedge. And that's following 10 years with the extra landscaping belt put in. This is from Hardy's Green, on the northern edge of Hardy's Green, so it's pretty distant from here. That's the wire line at the bottom of the picture, very distant. And that's at completion. You can just about make out some panels in there, but they are a fair way away. And then that's with the landscaping having gone in. This is from the footpath that is to the that runs towards the site from east of the site. That's what it looks like at completion. So you can see the panels in the distance. Yeah. And that's what it will look like for 10 years. This is from the other side of the site. So this is on the western boundary looking northeast. Again, wire line very, very distant. This is from the footpath with East Fort Road near St Mary's Grange. So again, a fair way from the site. You can see how distant the wire line shows. It's barely perceptible. And here's one from Aldecott Road, Cotford Green. Again, very distant. And that's at completion. Here are two photo montages from the public footpath that runs along the western boundary. That's effectively a left hand or facing northeast with a wire line below. So you will see the panels from here. That's facing southeast. That's the panels at completion. That's the panels at completion facing right, which is the will be southeast. And that's after 10 years. So still some glimpses. And still some glimpses there. So I will stop sharing. I may need to share again a little later. So as set out in the report, I think in some detail, this is an application for a solar farm that has been significantly amended through the application period. That wasn't amended at the request of officers particularly. That was a applicant's decision following the consultation and following access issues with regards to needing more archaeological information and being mindful of the significant representations that were received. That has cut down the scheme significantly, as I showed in that previous slide. It's one of the largest cutting backs of a large scheme I think we've had in the recent history, at least. I think I think there's bound to be some healthy debate, and the committee report sets out pretty much everything you need to know. I do have a couple of relatively late representations that I need to take you through. One is quite detailed, so I will take you through that now. I have firstly received another rep from Essex County Fire and Rescue from the Fire Infrastructure Risk team, and that has set out the fact that they have assessed the scheme. They assessed it on two previous occasions. They were consulted initially, then were consulted at reconsultation stage, and they set out the long and the short of it is they don't object to the scheme. They are, I mean, I will deal with fire safety in a second, but they've set out some guidelines. This letter has been sent to the applicants and to the applicants' agents. So you'll see a condition at the end of the report, which I'm sure you've been through, that sets, I think it's condition 20, which sets out the a fire risk safety management plan. So that will be a plan that the developers will put forward, demonstrating how they will deal with the scheme and how will they deal with the fire in an event that, in the unlikely event that should happen, how that will be dealt with. That will then be consulted upon with the health and safety executive and Essex County Fire and Rescue. So members can be assured that the scheme, in particular the battery area, which appears to be the area of significant concern to residents, that element of the scheme will not be able to go ahead until the fire service and the health and safety executive have agreed the mitigation plan. With regards to fire and fire safety, that will include as I've said on the report, that will include fire prevention and what happens in the event of a fire, how that will be dealt with. This late representation is useful for the applicants because it demonstrates the kind of things they need to cover. And we've set out some of that in the report already, but I have suggested to the applicants that should this scheme be approved, they speak directly to Essex County Fire and Rescue Infrastructure Team and the Health and Safety Executive, so they can effectively front load the discharge of the condition to make sure that their statement includes everything that they need. And then we will, at condition discharge time, we will consult both parties, and we will not discharge a condition unless they are satisfied with it. Secondly, we have had another detailed representation from CARE. That's the Campaign Against Rural Exploitation. And that came in the early hours of this morning. It's quite detailed, but I will take you through it. So they've gone through the committee report and highlighted areas where they don't agree. So I will take you through that on a kind of topic by topic basis, and it will hopefully set out their concerns. So paragraph 4.2, the topic is there's an amended scheme, potentially generates up to 40 megawatts of electricity, enough to power 1,200, 850 homes, and the operational life of development is expected to be 40 years. The CARE responses, they want to note the use of the word potentially. They say that solar farms routinely produce only 10 to 15% of their capacity, and therefore this would likely only be 12 to 1,900 homes. According to the Renewable Energies Foundation, they're unlikely to cover their operating costs in 20 years, and the panels are likely to need replacing in 15 to 20 years. Topic statement is that SP1 looks in favour of sustainable development in line with the NPPF. They do not consider this to be sustainable development just because it's for solar generation. They note the use of best and most versatile agricultural land. They say that is strongly discouraged. They'd like to see stricter regulations on B&V land, and they think that too many exceptions are being made. The report here is an example of that. They state that NPB guidance says the need for renewable energy does not automatically override environmental protections and the planning concerns of the local community. In the report, we said that the CPRE Essex objects to the scheme. They say that CPRE's solar rooftop campaign could be far more effective in effect. So that's a promotion of rooftop solar as opposed to using greenfield land for solar. They then talk about Essex County Fire and Rescue. They consider that Essex County Fire and Rescue were not aware that there's a battery storage system element. It is in the description, but that's the point they're making. They think it's going to be extremely hazardous in that respect, that they say the responsibility in the emergency falls to the operator, the council and the fire service. They weren't satisfied with initial comments from County Fire and Rescue. They say that the regulations are going to be changing shortly, and there's consultation by the National Fire Chiefs likely in the next few weeks that will change the guidance on such matters. They consider that there's inadequate emergency planning in this regard. They've contacted Essex County Fire and Rescue Chief Fire Officer and understand another submission will be submitted. As I said at the start, it has been, but it is not a formal objection. They then go on to make the point that because of the scheme being presented as part of a Rochdale envelope principle, the full detailed specifications of worst case scenario should have been presented, and they think that has not been done. It's a full application, and they consider it completely nonsensical to grant detailed permission on the Rochdale envelope principle, where critical sections of the application are not known for certain. In response to that, we'd say the idea of the Rochdale envelope is that you look at the maximum impact, and alongside the consultation responses from both HSE and Essex County Fire and Rescue, and the condition that we have suggested, I think, at number 20, that we can deal with that satisfactorily, but clearly CARE do not agree. They are not satisfied with the Health and Safety Executive's response, which was that solar farms are usually not a relevant development in relation to land use planning in the vicinity of major hazard sites, because they do not themselves introduce significant amounts of people into the area. They consider that to be inaccurate, and they consider that the battery store effectively has introduced potential hazardous substances onto the site, and that will be hazardous to the local population. They think that brings that under the Hazardous Substances Act. Given the size of the best plant shown on the map, on the plan, they consider that this act would apply, and they would like a minimum further consultation with the HSE. As I said, when we determine that, we get to the point of discharging that condition. As soon as that condition is submitted for discharge, the HSE will be further consulted, and if the HSE are not happy, we will not discharge the condition, and that part of the scheme will not be implementable. It's as simple as that. They say that planners need to fully understand these serious safety risks before a planning decision is made, which could potentially impact large parts of Colchester if a toxic gas cloud did result from BESS, fire blown by prevailing winds. When looking at this, the alternative site assessment, the report concludes that there's no alternative sites that are more suitable on this site. They state that Low Carbon, who's the applicant, out of all its solar plants, have never built one on brownfield sites. So they are saying that they don't effectively look at brownfield sites. They are keen on maximum profit extraction. So this assessment is skewed from the start. One of the main criteria used is the distance from the applicant's own connection point, Appleton substation, and the layer solar farm involving the same owner. It makes it clear that it's an arbitrarily imposed limitation imposed by the developer to their own advantage to reduce their infrastructure costs. Another criteria used where the land is currently commercially available, which has also been dismissed as insufficient to rule out other sites. They are not supportive of the use of the site because of its best and most versatile agricultural land classification. They say the efficient use of grade 2 and 3A productive land with these soil types is not having a few sheep on them. I think that was a reference to the parts of the committee report that said there is potential for sheep to be grazed. It's important for key arable foodstuffs such as wheat, other cereals, potatoes, onions, oilseed rape, peas, beans, etc. that cannot be grown on land that can only be used to rear sheep. No infrastructure is included to allow sheep grazing. Again, that could be set out at a later date. The land would be used for solar power generation. Sheep would be lawnmowers at best. The current landowner can choose to have bees on his land, but he currently doesn't. A nearby farmer already has 60 hives. The ALC land survey confirms that the developable area for the revised reduced scheme comprises a mix of subgrades 3A and 3B. And I think it's to surmise, CARE do not agree with the agricultural land classification survey. They consider grade 2 land to be present on the site, and they consider there to be more grade 3A than stated. Ultimately, your officers have to take into consideration the study that has been submitted with this application. They did look at their own, you'll see from the committee report, the CARE did look at their own, commission their own agricultural land survey for the 3 southern fields prior to those being taken out, and they found that there was more higher grade land than the submitted land survey found. And they also note that all the land can be aggregated by sustainable, i.e. non-borehole excess winter rainfall that would otherwise like to see, which adds to the land quality here and makes it very valuable. We said the proposed development would represent only a minor temporary BMV loss to the Colchester supply. They say 40 years cannot be temporary. It's the working lifetime of a generation. This has been challenged in Oxford. They say that sustainably irrigatable BMV land is uncommon in Colchester. That makes it doubly precious. They think that putting solar panels on this BMV site would make the repairs and maintenance of the irrigation system virtually impossible, reducing its land value versatility and impacting another 400 acres of land irrigated by the same system beyond. They looked at considering the site's potential use for powering 12,800 homes. They want to make the point that that's the potential, and the actual power is often generated is considerably less than stated. Between 11 to 15% is the norm. They make comments about the Renewable Energy Foundation research that shows that operational cost increases 3% in real terms per year and output declines by 2% after 20 years. So when the subsidy runs out, these sites will be uneconomic and they will be white elephants. 40 years is not temporary. An offshore turbine is significantly more powerful. What's the point in keeping light on if we have no food? Climate change and supply issues mean increasing dependence on UK food sources. They'd like to see solar going on top of commercial roofs, not on top of fields. All new builds in Colchester should have solar panels, which mean car parks and central reservations, not on productive agricultural land. It's possible the land could be returned to agriculture, but that is not certain, they say. It's possible the site owner could submit an application to extend it for another 40 years. I mean, that is the case, but ultimately we are here to determine an application for a 40-year permission, and that is what is conditioned. Amendments to the draft MPPF 2023 under consultation call for renewable energy sites to be repowered and their life extended, which places a doubt on that 40-year temporary claim. The committee report says that soils on present site will improve and regenerate over a prolonged break from the intensive arable function. And the care say it does not need a solar plant to achieve this. If the land was farmed regeneratively, its soils will be in a much better condition. Neighbouring fields are sustainably farmed and have a much better and have been improving in quality for a number of years. That's perfectly feasible at this site. The care representation that talks about the Rochdale envelope. This application is printed by way of the Rochdale envelope principle. The basis for using this is that planning application is made in the form of a worst case scenario. Anything that's changed in the application in the future state can only be better than what was originally proposed. Critically, the Rochdale envelope was designed to outline applications. A full application should not need to reply on the Rochdale envelope, as the final details should be known and included in the application. I mean, officers would submit that we have had enough detail to determine this application. These applications are often detailed via the Rochdale envelope method, and the idea of the Rochdale envelope is the maxima in terms of impact, and when the exact site layout comes in for condition discharge time, the officers can approve something smaller but nothing bigger. Point to consider: it's a full non-outline application. By applying Rochdale, the applicant leaves the local authority without the detail. With these details missing, the council cannot conclude it's adequate information. If detail on this application made without the full information, the ability to consider the impacts, the decision could be open to a legal challenge. If, on the other hand, it could be considered lawful to apply Rochdale in this full application, then the applicant has failed in its duty to provide the worst case scheme. It fails various highlights. It falls in various areas, highlighted in this paper, for example, deer fencing, which care say may well need to be upgraded to palisade fencing to upgrade security. The impact on the landscapes and the local communities may vary significantly depending on the type of security applied for, and the parameters of the impacts of the risk associated with toxic gases relating to fire and thermal runaway cannot be considered because they depend on the type of plant used. Battery technology has not been finalised, that's correct. Ergo, the committee is not in a position to consider its impact and determine this application. The proposed fencing around the site would be 2 meters in height, so would be deer fencing, as I showed, with wooden posts. It should be noted that proposed fencing is generally accepted among solar schemes and is fully insured. Therefore, it's not expected that any additional or more robust measures will be needed. That has been clarified with low carbon, and they've been told in no uncertain terms that we would not approve a palisade fence, for example, or for a more substantial fencing system, because that would not comply with the Rochdale envelope in terms of the LVIA. The LVIA has been assessed on the basis of the deer fencing that I've showed you images of. Claire say that the police forces across the UK state that farmland solar development is linked to a rise in rural crime. They're calling for enhanced security, taking very much beyond what could be considered in a rural environment. Essex Police's response describes a rise in crime in relation to solar farms and request that crime is a material consideration. This seems not to have happened. They recommend that the proposed open deer style fencing is upgraded to a substantial palisade, prison style or welded mesh fencing. That'd be clearly unacceptable. We, as officers, agree that is unacceptable. That is not what is applied for. Major insurer Marsh UK are reported to no longer permit the use of deer fencing on solar farms. The increasing number of companies are willing to insure solar sites because of losses, and it's the developer's contention they'll be fully insured with just deer fencing seems increasingly unrealistic and unsustainable. It does not represent the worst case scenario which is required when an application is made under the Rochdale envelope. Rooftop solar, on the other hand, is far more secure. Whilst the applicant is also responsible for the developments at Layer, it should be noted that two proposals form the separate projects, both in their planning application documentation, red line boundaries, and their ability to independently function one from the other. It is therefore considered there's no valid argument to suggest that Birch Solar Farm is part of any other solar project. KSA, Birch Solar Plant electricity connection cable is detailed as running for part of its length in the same trench as the Layer Solar Farm, which is correct. Both plants share the same connection point and will share other infrastructure. Construction has not started on the Layer plant despite having given approval in early 2022. That's because the developers are waiting to see if approval has been given to Birch so they can share economies of scale of construction, and hence the profitability of each is enhanced by the other. For the above, there's evidence that two are linked and they should have been considered in excess of 49.9 megawatt local authority limit. It can be viewed that the developer has structured the two plants in such a way as to circumvent planning, and a potential power output would be over 80 megawatt and INSIP, requiring government approval and a tighter planning regime. The applicant has a legal duty to the landowner to fully decommission site, return it to its current condition. Care say that 40 years is a long time in the future. There's a strong possibility the applicant's low carbon may have gone into liquidation or sold the stocks at other hands. American company Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance now has a 49% stake in low carbon, with the ambition between them of building 20 gigawatts of generating capacity so they could acquire a further stake or in the future or sell it on. Whilst the application states the site will be decommissioned, there's no detail on costings and how will this be financially secured. If the owner is in bankrupt or in liquidation, who will pay the cleanup costs? Current costings indicate it costs around £1 to scrap a panel in landfill, but £5 to recycle it. How can responsible recycling be ensured? Consideration of a financial bond as a condition of planning or other safeguards to ensure sufficient funds and liability with the owner remain available to ensure responsible recycling, removal and cleanup. One more topic. National policy is a focus, clear that the focus of planning decisions should be on whether a proposal is acceptable use of land rather than ensuring the secure and safe operation of installations. Such considerations are subject to building control and health and safety regimes, and planning decision makers should assume that these regimes will operate effectively. On this basis, the safety of the BESS should not weigh against the proposal and the planning balance. Lithium batteries are used in the manner of other devices and are widely accepted to be a safe technology. KSA, BESS are a major hazard As the 2020 Liverpool BESS battery fire showed, they released highly toxic gases, and water used to cool other batteries is so contaminated it had to be tankered away and can't be allowed to enter the natural drainage system. Firefighters died from the toxic gases fighting a BESS fire last year. We're not talking about small mobile phones or even a car battery here. Each BESS unit is the size of a large shipping container. There's 16 of them. There's a primary school less than a mile away from the site. At the BESS Tesla, and they are the battery experts, fire in Australia, a 5-mile cordon was imposed because of toxic gases, with everyone staying indoors with the windows shut. That would be most of Colchester, and it would be impossible to protect the animals at the zoo. Given these types of risks, which the applicant fails to mention, it's inconceivable that Colchester residents' safety should not form part of the planning process. Colchester Council and Essex Fire Services, as well as the applicant, would be responsible for dealing with any incidents. In response to a growing number of BESS incidents, the National Fire Chiefs Council would publish guidance on BESS fires within weeks. A draft is attached in the care dossier. Expert recommendations offer 2 site access roads to help firefighters approach upwind of toxic gases and at areas of nearby vegetation and wildfire risk cleared. The BESS is situated between 2 areas of ancient woodlands. To put a BESS here is wildly inappropriate, but to clear the site to make it compliant would be unthinkable. The application has only 1 access road. Some houses only 400 meters from the site. Schools within a mile. Safely cannot be an afterthought to the planning process. The developer cannot be allowed to remain silent on the full details of the BESS risks and mitigation, and they will take and walk away, leaving Colchester Council and the fire service to deal with them. With BESS the size of this site, 16 battery units the size of a large shipping containers, 8 inverters of similar size to the substation, and equipment up to 6 meters high, full consideration of exactly how these risks should be given prior to any planning decision being made. To date, Essex Fire representation made no comment on the BESS issue in part of this application. Care is concerned that given the timing the developer needs to make little commitment to the BESS site safety, leaving the responsibility for emergency response largely within the fire service and the council. That is the care additional rep. So you are fully appraised of that. I think we will go to public speakers, Chair, if that suits you, and then any questions can be drawn out through the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. A lot of details, an awful lot of details, but there were applications. So we move on now to the public speakers. For public speaking against, we have Graham Barney. If you can come forward, please. Graham, you have 3 minutes to speak. A bell will go after 2, then you only have 1 more, and the time will start when you're ready and you press the red button to speak.
Good evening. As Chair of Cotford and Easthorpe Parish Council, I'm bringing you the views of both Parish Council of Cotford, Easthorpe and Birch, both of whom submitted very clear objections to both the original and amended proposals. I'd like to take you back to what Greg Barker, the Minister for Energy and Climate Change, said in 2013. As we take solar to the next level, we must be thoughtful, sensitive to public opinion, and mindful of the wider impacts. It should not be at any cost. Not if it rides roughshod over the views of local communities. If you approve this application as it is, you will do exactly the opposite of what he said. Renewable energy targets should not be at the cost of losing productive farmland. Food security is as important as energy security. Recent food shortages have shown this clearly. The 40-year scheme is hardly temporary, and during that time, the technology used will become obsolescent. The solar plant is unlikely to generate anywhere near 40 megawatts of power, even at peak, with a more likely 10 to 15% only being regularly generated. And there is, of course, a 1% decline in this generation power year on year. There is a real risk to our communities, to our environment, with loss of food production from productive farmland, a negative impact on nearby heritage assets and ancient woodlands from potential fires, toxic fumes, and the loss of protected species areas, notably as highlighted skylarks and badgers. There's a significant risk from fire and toxic gas release from the large battery energy storage systems, BESS, on site, which produce an extreme hazard. The developer remains silent on BESS risks. It is left to Essex Fire Brigade. Firefighters have died in several countries. There is no certain way to put a BESS fire out. Thermal runaway, if used, allows fires to burn out, emitting highly toxic gases requiring a 5-mile radius, with 2 primary schools within a mile, homes 400 metres away, Colchester Zoo and Abberton Reservoir there. BESS is located in the middle of 2 ancient woodlands, which the Forestry Commission state is continuous, irreplaceable habitat. Any water used to put out the fire becomes heavily contaminated with heavy toxic metals and hydrofluoric acid, which if entering local water courses will cause an environmental catastrophe. You as a planning committee have a responsibility to ensure that the safety of residents within our communities is not considered as an afterthought to the planning process. Our community is concerned about safety, about increasing rural crime, and on behalf of 2,000 Copford, Easthorpe and Birch residents, I urge you to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, public speaker 4 is Ed Perrin. Could I have Ed? So the same rules apply, Ed. We have 3 minutes. The bell will go after 2. We indicate we have 1 more minute left. It will start when you press the red button.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak before you today in support of this application. My name is Ed Perrin and I am Head of Project Development at Low Carbon. This project is for a 40 megawatt solar farm with battery storage, which would provide enough electricity for 12,850 Colchester homes per annum, saving over 7,000 tons of CO2 and would have a sizable and positive contribution towards your net zero target. In developing this project, Low Carbon has undertaken wide-ranging technical assessments to ensure that the design understands and reflects local constraints. We have worked extensively with technical consultees to resolve any issues and are pleased to have no outstanding technical objections. We have also listened to the views expressed by local people, and we have made substantial changes to the project to reflect local concerns by removing several fields from the application, but always balancing this against the need to maximize the green energy generated. The result is a scheme which is sympathetic to the local natural environment, which mitigates impacts on the local community, and which also generates significant community benefits. We have added additional tree belts and hedgerows to further mitigate visual impact, and this planting offers a biodiversity net gain of over 40% for habitats and over 170% for hedgerows. No site is perfect, and we recognise there have been concerns raised on the use of farmland. Importantly, this site contains only 0.11% of Colchester's best and most versatile land, but will provide sufficient electricity for 16% of the district's homes. The land can continue to be used for agriculture in the form of grazing, and this temporary absence of arable farming will allow the soil to rest and recover, improving its quality, following which the equipment will be fully removed at the end of its operational life and the land returned to its original use. Importantly, this project is deemed by your planning officer to provide a positive planning balance, where the benefits of the scheme in its contribution to Colchester's climate emergency agenda outweighs the temporary loss of best and most versatile agricultural land. Councillors, the scale of the climate emergency and energy crisis has never been greater, and all councils must now act with urgency. You have before you today a proposal which will help Colchester move towards net zero with a strong officer recommendation for approval. I urge you to support your officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have a statement by Councillor Kevin Bentley, read by Robert Carmichael.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear Chair and members, firstly, my apologies that I cannot be with you this evening due to other official commitments in Essex. However, along with my ward colleague, councillor Andrew Ellis, I would like to speak about the application before you for a solar plant and to register my objection. I am not against solar energy as it forms part of our sustainable plans to reduce carbon emissions and clearly contributes to our endeavours as a nation to reduce high risks of climate change that face us and our future families. In fact, in our ward, we have other sites that function well. However, it is about the siting of this particular application that causes concern. I would stress that the company involved has been very good and engaged with us as councillors, and we have already expressed our concern about the original plan. And we acknowledge that changes have been made. It does not, however, go far enough, and I think that the risks very much outweigh the benefits. One area of concern is the location and the roads that lead to the site. This is a very rural area with very rural roads, and cars in the area of the road network are not able to pass each other. This is a common feature in the countryside. Therefore, to subject these local roads to so much increased traffic and inevitable and costly damage to surfaces, ironworks and soft verges from large vehicles and the people who live nearby to heavy HGV traffic during construction and ongoing maintenance is unacceptable. Furthermore, in this case, and in my opinion, it is unacceptable risk to the natural environment, and pollution caused would counteract any benefits gained from solar energy produced. Another concern is around the sheer scale of the lithium battery storage system, and I am concerned that this could prove to be a fire risk. I know that residents have consulted with Essex Fire Chief on this matter, but I would urge members to investigate this point thoroughly. This site is currently used as an arable farmland for growing food, the majority of which is classified as best and most versatile land in planning terms. I believe it is important that in a post-Brexit world and the greater need for homegrown cereals and vegetables, we would be preserving such land for this use and not turning it over to what amounts to industrial use, albeit for sustainable energy. I don't object as the local member lightly, and I am a great supporter of renewable energy, as I believe many of the constituents and those who are objecting to this application are as well. My objection is based purely on location, size, traffic complications, which could lead, in my opinion, to higher pollution, potential of fire risk with the size of the BESS, and very importantly, the loss of the prime agricultural land. I am grateful for whoever has communicated this message verbally to you on my behalf, and I do hope you will take into consideration my comments and views. Councillor Kevin Bentley, Ward Member for Marks and Layer Ward.
Thank you, Robert. Now we have a visiting councillor, Councillor Andrew Ellis, please. You know the score, Andrew. You have the delicious time of 5 minutes, and the bell will go after 4.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And indeed, thank you, committee members. Let me begin by saying I believe James Ryan to be one of the most genuinely helpful, fair, consistent planning officers I've had the pleasure of dealing with during my 18 or so years as a councillor. He is excellent. However, liking and respecting someone doesn't mean you have to agree with them, and I can't agree with his recommendation for approval for this application. You've heard from 3 people this evening. Low Carbon, a privately owned UK investment company based a long way away from Colchester. You've heard from Graham Barney, Chairman of Cotford Parish Council, and Councillor Kevin Bentley, both speaking on behalf of a very substantial number of local residents who oppose this application. Importantly, all are pro-solar, but that's where the similarities end. Graham, like myself, Councillor Bentley, and the vast majority of residents we represent, believes that the future of solar lies in brownfield sites, industrial, commercial and domestic roads, and not on best and most versatile agricultural land in the heart of the countryside, where it permanently alters the landscape character and removes land from food production. The NPPF leads you to the same conclusion. It expects local authorities to protect and enhance valued landscapes, the beauty of the countryside, and the benefits of the best and most versatile farmland in their decision-making. And as James Ryan has noted in his report, our own ENV1 states that the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside will be recognised and assessed. Development will only be permitted where it would not adversely affect that intrinsic character and beauty. And intrinsic is a key word here. Members may feel that the open landscape in this area would benefit from additional planting. In places, I'd agree, but the intrinsic and much valued landscape character is one of openness with far-reaching views, not one of enclosure. However temporary the use, and 40 years, as we've heard this evening, is a lifetime, a working lifetime, so stretches the term temporary to the extreme, this locally valued landscape will be fundamentally altered forever. Those long treasured views discussed in the Copford with Easthorpe neighbourhood plan will be lost, replaced by fencing, tall hedgerows, row upon row of panels, batteries, lighting and CCTV cameras, effectively large-scale industrialisation of the countryside. And while I must thank Low Carbon for removing one particularly intrusive element of their scheme, the harm to visual amenity remains over a large area. Whatever happened to the policy of the public being entitled to a view? Yes, solar plays a role in our bid to free ourselves from fossil fuel reliance. But as Birch Parish Council have said, it's about using the right land in the right place for the right use. And as Graham Barney quoted, it should not do so at any cost in any place whilst riding roughshod over the views of local communities. Please also understand that despite what the report's conclusion says, this development does nothing to contribute towards the council's 2030 net zero climate targets. It's owned and run by a private investment company, not Colchester City Council. The electricity generated is going into the national grid, not a Colchester local network. And as renewable technology improves, it's obvious that solar is no magic bullet. This incredibly land-hungry development will generate energy, we are told, for around 12,000 homes, whilst I think the CPRE has pointed out a single offshore wind turbine can power 16,000 homes. On best and most versatile land, I can't vilify a landowner for wanting to generate substantially more than their agricultural income. Money for anyone, and particularly those involved in agriculture currently, is a powerful motivator. However, much of the development site is graded good and very good agricultural land. And as Councillor Bentley has said, this land is key to food production in the UK if we're to have food security. Whilst it may appear small in the scheme of Colchester agriculture, the message that it's okay to take best and most versatile land out of crop production at a time when food security couldn't be much higher on the agenda is the wrong one to send. Chairman, you asked me at scrutiny when I was the planning portfolio holder whether I thought there was still a role for planning committees. My answer was a strong yes. Local members understand local issues and weigh for themselves what is important and what can be seen as less so. Members' balance weightings can legitimately differ from those of the planning officer. Councillor Bentley and Graham Barney have given you a lot to think about. And for my part, and on behalf of the community we represent, I ask you to preserve our much valued open landscape, retain farmland for food production, and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. And well remembered about the planet. I think you're right. So we're back to you now, James. I think that we had a lot by Graham Barney and spoke there. If we could address some of his issues around there. A lot of it, as actually the battery safety issue. I think we start with that, please, and it seems a genuine concern all round.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, we'll I'll go through those points and we'll start with the battery safety issue. Absolutely. I mean, as I said before, and the precise design of the batteries that are to be used has not yet been set out. The technology that we use has not yet been demonstrated to us. That is on the basis that the officers will not approve anything without the say-so of the fire service and of the health and safety executive. And if you look at condition 20, that sets out we need a full plan of how that would work, and Low Carbon have accepted that absolutely, and they will front load those discussions prior to submitting any submission. So what we get is a very detailed document that I can then send off to our in-house environmental protection team, the Essex County Fire and Rescue, the infrastructure team there at the fire service, and also the health and safety executive, who will be able to adjudicate on that basis. And as you'll see from the wording of that condition, they cannot start anything to do with the battery energy storage system prior to that being approved. If we get to a point, and I'll discuss this in detail with low carbon, if we get to a point where all those parties or all parties, environmental protection, fire, and the HSE, and if either of those are unhappy, the discharging condition will be refused and they will not be able to implement that part of the permission. It is clearly divisible from the rest of it, and they've confirmed to me that it is divisible from the rest of it. They can build this solar farm without the batteries, it just wouldn't be as effective, and it wouldn't be able to deliver power throughout the entire 24-hour period because it won't be able to store. However, ultimately, if it can be done safely, and they believe it can, there is every reason that it should be able to be provided. But we will require that detail. They can get us, whoever's going to provide them with the batteries and a fire specialist to draft that document, and we can have discussions with the various interested parties to make sure that this is not a risk that is unacceptable. So that is dealt with by condition, and officers consider that to be entirely appropriate. As I say, we've had no objection from the fire service, we've had no objection from our own environmental protection team, and we've had no objection from the health and safety executive. The batteries were in the description, so we are sure they're aware of it. Officers could not suggest a refusal of the scheme on the basis of safety, because there is no evidence to demonstrate that this will be unsafe once it has complied with the condition number 20, as has been suggested. This has been looked at in some detail at a recent appeal in Devon. It was an application that was determined by a public inquiry where I think CPRE, the CPRE branch in Devon, were running similar arguments, were concerned about the safety impacts of BESS, so battery energy storage systems, and under cross-examination, this was examined in some detail. The inspector made a decision, but it was called in by the Secretary of State, and it's a recent decision. It's Lucy Fraser, KC MP, looked at this, approved Secretary of State on the 5th of December 2022, so only in December just gone. And well, I can read you the relevant bit.
And just to clarify, are those the same batteries that were used on this site?
They are using a battery storage system. We don't know what batteries they're going to use on this site because they haven't yet purchased them.
Okay.
But that will be approved by condition with the detail set out of how the batteries will be made fire safe. But in terms of safety, there's only one paragraph that the Secretary of State looked at, but by the reasons given, the Secretary of State agrees with the inspector that there's nothing in relation to the safety of the BESS which should weigh against the proposal in the planning balance. He therefore agrees with the inspector in according the safety of the BESS neutral weight in the planning balance. In reaching this conclusion, he's taken into account Devon CPRE's rep, which raised concerns. In respect to that point, the Secretary of State agrees with the inspector's conclusion. So it has been tested at a very recent appeal, and in that instance, different scheme, but ultimately a battery storage centre, battery energy storage system, and in that instance, which is a very recent called in appeal, the Secretary of State gave it neutral weight in the planning balance, and that is a clear indication that these items can be held to be safe, and with the condition that we've got suggested at the end of the report, we consider that to be entirely appropriate. That's battery energy storage systems and fire risk. Other points that were raised, the temporary nature, or 40 years not being very temporary. Ultimately, 40 years is a long time, no doubt about it, and it's clearly something for members to consider in the planning balance. However, it is not a permanent permission that is being granted. You'll see that in the suggested conditions at the end, if for some reason this kind of technology becomes defunct, stops generating power, it needs to be removed far sooner than the 40 years. It won't just sit there for 40 years before the council can enforce against it. So that, I think that's in condition, let me point you to the right number. It's one of the earlier conditions I wrote. So condition 2, within 1 year of the site ceasing power production, or 40 years of this permission. The site should be cleared of all infrastructure panels, cables, fencing, and all associated paraphernalia. So if it's generating power, we wouldn't expect it to be removed. If it ends up that there's such a significant feed of offshore wind, for example, bearing in mind that many offshore wind schemes are large insips and are very, very slow to get through the system. If that, for example, renders this scheme uneconomically viable and simply not needed anymore, would the council have the power to make the site return to its agricultural use? So this is a temporary permission, and there is a condition protecting that. The consideration that it will generate less than the suggested 12,800 or so homes. Low carbon are absolutely open about the fact that solar panels generate power when it's sunny. It's not going to generate power all the time. They accept that. It's part of the UK's energy mix, and that's why it's a mix, because it's needed. We need solar on buildings, we need solar on brownfield land, we need solar on greenfield land, we need wind, wave, tidal, potentially nuclear, to remove our reliance on hydrocarbons. So it is a good contribution, and the power it will generate will depend on the panels they use and the efficiency of the panels they use, which is ever increasing. And will also depend on the weather to a certain extent and the sunshine hours, of which we are blessed in this part of the country, but that doesn't mean it will generate all the time. However, having battery storage on site means it'll be able to capture when it is generating and feed into the grid at the times of less sunlight. Impact on the environment. The environmental impact of the scheme was subject to the environmental statement and the assessment that has gone on in that respect. So it was scoped into the ES. So it's got a detailed assessment of the impact of the environmental impact of the scheme, which concludes that the impact can be mitigated successfully and can also result in a significant biodiversity net gain, a significant canopy cover increase. Obviously, the removal of the 3 southern fields has significantly reduced the impact the scheme will have in that respect, as they will be left, but they will not benefit from the biodiversity net gain, of course, because they are not part of the developable area. This is not a case of officers just taking the applicant's thoughts and suggestions as read. We've commissioned independent ecologists. So that's Place Services Ecology, who are a wing of Essex County Council. They had a holding objection initially prior to the changes to the scheme, and a meeting was convened between planners, their ecologists, our ecologists, Place Services, and the applicants to ensure that the skylight mitigation, for example, can be achieved by condition. You'll see a number of conditions at the end of the report that deal with matters such as this, and they are at (11). So they've got to set out actions required in accordance with the ecological appraisal recommendations. They need a farmland mitigation strategy. So that is for the skylark habitat. A construction environmental management plan for biodiversity. A biodiversity enhancement scheme at condition 14, and wildlife sensitive lighting design scheme at 15. So they have a number of ecological conditions to ensure the biodiversity net gain that they claim will be achieved on site. And on that basis, the scheme will actually provide a significant increase in biodiversity net gain as opposed to the current status quo. Woodland was mentioned. The battery energy storage system has been intentionally placed between the 2 pieces of woodland because of the screening that will afford. I think, as we saw from site visits today, that screening is likely to be effective from the word go, because from many angles it is already well screened. The Forestry Commission have not objected to the scheme, and our in-house tree arb planner has also not objected to the scheme, subject to the buffer, 50-metre buffers to the ancient woodland. which the scheme can provide. On that basis, it's not reasonably considered that the scheme will be materially harmful to the woodlands. The Forestry Commission did request a change to the scheme which would involve a larger link between the two woodlands. Unfortunately, I mean, that has been discussed with the applicants, but that's not possible because it would involve moving the battery area, and that would increase the visual impact of the battery area. So they would prefer it to be left where it is. There is still additional planting in that area, along with gapping up of hedgerows where necessary, but the actual link between the two woodlands is not possible, unfortunately. So best and most versatile agricultural land and food production. And this is simply a matter for the planning balance ultimately. The scheme is, I can show you the, I'll just share my screen again. Hold on. So this is a drawing that shows the grades of land. So it's either, so best and most versatile agricultural land is grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 3A, grade 3B, which are two subgrades of grade 3, and then land below that, which is of significantly poorer quality in effect. So this is subgrade 3A and B. The dark green is subgrade 3A, and the lighter green is subgrade 3B. So it is best and most versatile agricultural land, but it is at the lower end of the spectrum. As you can see, the redlined area to the south of the site is the 3 fields that were removed. So they had a significant amount of 3A. They are being retained in agricultural production. That's the tenanted land. It is best and most versatile agricultural land. There is no doubt about that. I think the objectors consider it to be of a better quality than the agricultural land classification that the applicants have submitted. However, this is the evidence we've got to go on. It is clear in the MPPF that is the decision makers, is in the decision makers' gift to consider the impact of food production and the quality of land. In this instance, this officers consider that this would not have a demonstrable impact on the food production and best and most versatile agricultural land supply in the Colchester City Council district. So on that basis, we can, as you'll see from the report, we consider that the benefits in terms of low carbon energy production outweigh the temporary loss of best and most versatile agricultural land. But I want to be absolutely honest with you that that's the data that we've been provided. And this is a table showing percentages and hectareage of the grades proposed development area. On the left is the current scheme. What they call in the ALC report planning boundary was the wider site prior to the hiving off of the 3 southern fields. So you can see the percentage of obviously the best and the subgrade 3A was dropped somewhat because there was best and most versatile agricultural land there too. But that is absolutely for the decision maker. And your officers considered that in this instance, the benefits of the scheme outweigh the temporary loss of that land. Heritage assets, I'll hand over to Simon for a little bit of discussion about heritage assets in a minute, if that's okay. Roads and traffic, and Councillor Kevin Bentley mentioned roads and traffic. During operation, this scheme will generate very, very low traffic generation in the region of maybe a van a day. The panels have to be cleaned with distilled water, so there'll be a window cleaner that will come and clean the panels from time to time to keep them in tip-top condition. The district network operator will also come and monitor and service the substation. So that it's not free of cars, but it's extremely low. So potentially a van a day. The construction phase will have a potential 3 HGVs, potentially 20 two-way vehicle movements per day throughout the construction phase for 16 to 18 weeks, and 3 HGVs. So we must bear in mind that HGVs do pass along there. Farm vehicles are slow moving and wide as well, often towing trailers. So it's not unheard of in the area. The Highway Authority has been consulted. They do not object on that basis. They have been in discussion, low carbon that is, with the school to avoid any HGV movements in the school pickup and drop off times. As you can see in the report, that was not suggested by officers. That was something they did off their own back. So they will not be having any HGV movements at school pickup and drop off times, which is obviously one of the peak daytime generators in the area on School Road. And on that basis, having given the Highway Authority, which is Essex County Council, having assessed the scheme and the transport statement that accompanied it, they are satisfied that the scheme is acceptable and the impacts do not come to the point of being severe. Again, they've asked for a traffic management plan in the construction method statement, so that will all be dealt with in precise detail at the time of the condition discharge. That's highways. Batteries we've talked about. I think I've dealt with the majority of the points that Councillor Andrew Ellis raised. Oh, they made a good point about the Colchester climate crisis. This is not a Colchester Council scheme, absolutely. And I don't want to mislead anyone to say that it is. It's a private scheme. The point I was trying to make was, I suppose, more of an ideological one, that it contributes towards a zero carbon future for the district or the city, as we are. It is not a Colchester scheme. And is not being run by the council. It's not part of our energy generation for our own buildings. It is a private scheme, absolutely, but that doesn't take away from the fact that we are a city council that has declared a climate crisis, and clearly low carbon energy generation is part of that potential solution to the one of the greatest challenges that we face, which is hence why we've declared a climate crisis. The matter of brownfield sites first. I mean, I think officers support solar on brownfield. We support it on buildings where appropriate. We support it on anywhere it can go where the harm, if it causes harm, can be adequately mitigated. There's been many a representation made about putting solar on industrial buildings. And that is something we also support, and we don't think it's an either or, we think it's an and. Unfortunately, many large buildings in the district struggle to cope with the loading of solar panels, so it's not always a technical possibility, but we would support it wherever we can. We do have some applications. I remember an application a couple of years ago for a number of panels on a large building on the Severals estate. Several's industrial area, and we try and support them and approve them without hesitation as soon as we can, assuming they don't cause material harm. And on industrial sites that they are extremely useful. They are not generally at anything like the scale that this scheme delivers, unfortunately, but we would support them if they would. So brownfield first, absolutely, but we also need to allow some agricultural land to be used in order to, if the harm that it causes can be adequately mitigated as per the MPPF. Heritage assets were mentioned, and the setting of, I know Simon Cairns has been on site to assess that, and he drafted that section of the report, so I'll quickly hand over to him for a brief discussion on listed buildings and heritage assets.
Thank you, Chair, members. This aspect is discussed in the report at pages 62 and 63. Quite unusually, there are relatively a handful of listed buildings that have indirect effects arising from the introduction of the solar array within a wider setting. The revised scheme actually withdrew 3 of these assets from any meaningful or potential impact. So out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 listed buildings that were identified as having a potential indirect impact, 3 of those listed buildings actually were no longer affected by virtue of the revised site area, which has been explained within the presentation. The remaining assets are indirectly affected. That means that it is only development within their wider setting that gives rise to any effect whatsoever. And as you've seen from the landscape proposals, there are substantial areas of screening and filtering planting that would further decrease any potential indirect impact on the significance of those assets. The matter for members to consider is the degree to which the agricultural use of the land contributes to the significance of those listed buildings. We're obviously dealing with vernacular rural heritage, so there is a degree of contribution insofar as these are rural assets, many of which have agricultural origins, and the fact that the land is in agricultural use does to some degree reflect their character as rural buildings. But insofar as it actually makes a direct contribution to significance, virtually all of their significance lies in the fact that they are examples of vernacular architecture from the pre-industrial period, which were originally designed or intended to have a direct relationship with agricultural production in the vicinity. The contribution, therefore, of the agricultural use is quite minor, and the loss of that use would be largely and significantly mitigated by the landscape planting that is proposed. That doesn't mean to say there is no impact whatsoever on those remaining assets, but in terms of the way in which we grade those impacts, it would be at the lowest end of less than substantial harm. The task for you as a decision maker is to weigh that slight degree of harm against the public benefits of the scheme, and that is your role as the decision maker. Obviously, the case officer has set out his opinion within the report, but you can weight that as you will, but it is a very low degree of harm that you need to weigh against the public benefits identified within the report of the scheme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a matter of clarity, we did invite Essex County Highways to this meeting as they're the experts, but they failed to, or they had nobody to spare to come along tonight. We did ask. I hand over to members now. So, Councillor Jackie McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Very detailed report. Thank you very much, officers. I very concerned regarding your last comments on the listed buildings. You know, these, when you just said about the, the detrimental harm, these buildings are in a setting that is enhancing them, where they're going to be surrounded by solar panels. It's going to be jeopardizing them for the view of everything. So it's not very pleasant at all. And I think we should be mindful of that, because listed buildings, are so well, we have so many of them in the area, which are very precious to us, because once they're gone, they're gone. And it is our past. How many solar panels do we have on any of our asset buildings that the council own, to the extent to what we, to generate electricity for the council? I know you are are trying to enhance this and go forward with it, but how many do we have? Because at Tollgate, there are none on the schemes that we are building. And I know I mention it at every meeting because it's such a concern to me. You have got, a substantial square meterage there, which is producing nothing. And it could be so invaluable to the rest of Colchester. And when you weigh the balance out with, solar panels, yes, they're easy to put on the ground, they're cheap, and it's, a quick start. But, you know, it does worry me that we're not taking advantage of some of these industrial buildings, which we should be, and encouraging them when they're building them in some form. Have they started the layer site yet? Is that in full production, or is it all up and running? Or are we waiting for this one to come forward before they can actually finish it or build it or put the panels up? You know, that's another question which I would like answered. Have we also got any panels on the Northern Gateway site? Are we encouraging that? I know we've got the heat source system, but is there anything else that's substantial to go on those industrial buildings? Or are we building them with a shape of roof that is not going to be sustainable to have panels on? Because we should be thinking of the architecture when we're going forward. I think the road network in Birch and Cotford is never going to be satisfactory for Arctic lorries going over those lanes. You're going to have to be very careful which route is taken. You may even have to look off the Malden Road, because round some of those bends, they are very narrow and they'll be disintegrating the verges and the banking. Is the battery container bunded, and is it near any waterway or ditches? Please, because if so, you have got to give thought to the runoff of water around the area. If there's any contamination, that all feeds into the reservoir at Layer, which obviously we're all drinking in Stanway, so, you know, and the surrounding area. So you have to make sure that the health and safety for the residents as well on that front. I'll leave it at that for the moment, and I'll wait for the other panels to have, you know, the other councillors to have this.
Yes, there's quite a few questions there, but some of them aren't really connected to this planning application as such, but if we can have answers for them, please.
Yes, I will. I'll do my best. I'll revert to Simon for the LB question in a second. How many solar panels on CCC assets? I don't have that data, unfortunately. I know CBH have been rolling out a scheme of solar panels on their own on the council housing stock, but apart from that, I am not aware. We just simply don't have the data, unfortunately. But I mean, we absolutely concur. It would be, officers would be very supportive of solar on council buildings, and as with buildings at Tollgate, Northern Gateway, that kind of thing. We don't have a policy context that can force developers to do that yet. It is effectively optional, but I mean, I agree with Councillor McLean's sentiments that it should be encouraged wherever, and we do have policy that encourages it. There's just no hard and fast demand. Anyway, we can actually demand it. Is Layer up and running? No, it isn't. Layer had a scheduled nature monument running right through it. It was designated within the application period. It was very sensitive archaeologically, and had a significant amount of more archaeology to do than this scheme. So they have been working on that. They're currently in the process of discharging their conditions. They're not they're not delaying for any particular reasons. It's the one of the reasons is the archaeology, and it just is very, very time consuming doing a strip of such a huge area. You may remember that it was initially delayed to get, I think, 1% done. I think our in-house archaeologists wanted another 1 or 2% more of the entire site area, which is a huge amount of archaeology when you're looking at a site of that scale. So that has caused they've just been doing that. They've been doing it as quick as they can, but I've just received word from the archaeologists that is kind of finishing up, I think. So that is currently in for discharge. So they are discharging their conditions, but no, it is not up and running yet. The road being poor, I think I've addressed that. Their traffic management plan says they will come in the way we came in, hopefully not taking a wrong turn down the A12, but it will come in on the A12, London Road, School Road, past the school, not at school pickup and drop off times. And then where we turned hard left, right, the HGVs will turn a hard left and go straight to into the farmyard around that way. They low carbon will repair any verges that their HGVs damage. Absolutely, they are a responsible developer. They have an agreement with county to do the trench in the road, so that comes with various obligations, and the traffic management plan will secure any. If there's any overrunning and verges need to be reinstated, I mean, obviously they will try and avoid it. As I said, you're looking at 3 HGVs a day throughout the construction phase. I think the key matter of the planning balance area is that is not sufficient to refuse the scheme. These schemes have to be accessed. They have to bring the panels in somehow. That is part of the that is a tiny amount of harm in the overall planning balance, because it can be ultimately rectified. It can be mitigated against, and it can be mitigated entirely by the reinstatement of any damage that has been occurred, should that occur. The BESS is bunded. Yep, it's got a bund right around it. There is water in the area. The potential ingress to water courses is obviously only in the event of a fire. There is no expectation there will be a fire. The low carbon want to do everything they can to avoid a fire, and that will all be dealt with in the fire management plan set out in condition 20. That will be a very detailed document, and we will pore over that to ensure that it's absolutely acceptable, so that any toxicity into water bodies can be adequately mitigated against. Again, development sometimes causes harm. It's the planning balance is all about whether that harm can be satisfactorily mitigated against to allow the development to commence. In this instance, we think it can by virtue of that condition. So, Simon, is there anything else you'd like to say on listed buildings and their setting?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, before I go on to listed buildings, I could possibly just refer to Councillor McLean's references to council-owned sites. I can confirm that the Turnstone scheme for the leisure proposals does have PV on the roof of those buildings, which was also something that members were quite enthusiastic about at the time. As you'll also be aware, in terms of the site to the east of Turnstone, the mixed-use site, the homes and businesses on that site are fed by a district heating system, which is entirely innovative and sustainable. So all of those buildings will form part of a sustainable energy solution for those buildings. In terms of the road network, you'll be aware that neither the Essex County Highways nor the National Highways have objected on highway grounds. So it would be extremely difficult for us to sustain an objection with regard to the use of the highways. Also, having regard to the existing agricultural use of the site, members will be aware of the size of combines that trundle up and down lanes, and they are vastly larger than most HGVs that would be bringing panels to site. So I think that probably is nullified by that existing use. In terms of the listed building setting, very unusually, we're faced with not even a handful of listed buildings within the immediate area of the development. I don't know if we can put the plan up that does have the heritage assets on it. But we are dealing with less than 5 listed buildings. I think probably about 3 that have a very, very minor effect in terms of the panels in their wider setting, which would be mitigated by screen planting and in some cases already mitigated by existing screen planting. Most of the significance of those buildings is intrinsic to the fabric of the buildings. That's why they're listed. They aren't particularly listed because they have a planned setting. Normally for significance to be gained from a setting, the setting has to be planned or designed to contribute to the significance of that asset. In this instance, it is purely coincidental or incidental rather that these buildings are rural buildings and have a rural setting. The ability of the public still to see those buildings as rural types of historic buildings would not be affected by the proposals. The only thing that would be in terms of the wider environment in which those assets are experienced, in terms of walkers and cyclists and other sensitive receptors who would perceive in some of those very limited views that James presented on screen, there to be some very small degree of intrusion from the panels, particularly in the early stages following installation. So the degree of harm to the assets identified would be at the lowest end of less than substantial. And that is a matter for you as the decision makers, members, to take into the planning balance, but it would be a very, very weak matter in this instance, having regard to the number of the assets, the fact they are grade 2, but the fact that the harm is very, very minor and purely a very small erosion of the quality of the rural environment, which would still read as a rural environment. And indeed, the reinstatement of field parcel boundaries would, to some degree, actually reinstate some of the lost historic character of the setting. I mean, we have to recall the fact that the enclosure landscape, which this area was originally characterized by, has been itself eroded by field amalgamation, and the change from mixed farms to more arable farming also has fundamentally changed the landscape character and setting of those assets.
So, sorry, Simon, there's a drawing there showing the site. There's the two woodlands. So there's the farm itself. There's two building opposite. There's two building at the top that's got the landscaping around it already. White House Farm, Hoggets.
So White House Farm and Hoggets are no longer even remotely in the area of the proposed development. If we go to the northern edge, we can see that northern group. There's that Buckingham Hall Farm.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a farmhouse and listed barn.
We stood right past the listed barn there today, the black weatherboarded
And
barn.
there are proposals for additional screen planting around that group. But the relationship between that group and the wider landscape is already blocked by large agri-industrial building types. So really the building then to the north on the road leading to Mulberry Green is already substantially, has a very enclosed landscape setting and doesn't have an open landscape setting such that the nearest panels would really have any material impact on that particular asset. So we are dealing with an extremely small number of assets, given the overall density of listed buildings we have within the borough, and particularly in the rural areas. Here's a good example. There's the cursor there, which shows the group to the western side of the lane there, which would have panels in their general vicinity, but mitigated by further landscape planting. And then we go to the north up the lane and along that road leading to Mulberry Green, there is a listed building up there, which is substantially screened already. For those members who visited the site, they may have encountered that building, which has a very large landscape buffer on its western side, which would largely already prevent there being any erosion of the wider setting of that building. So we are dealing with an extremely small number of listed buildings that would have a very remote change to their setting. The three listed buildings which were most affected were Hoggets and White House Farm, together with the barn at White House Farm, and the removal of those southern fields from the scheme has largely withdrawn that impact. Thank you, Chair.
James, you still got your mic on. Councillor McLean, have you got you've got to come back to that? And just to clarify that, the Highways Authority have made no objections whatsoever to any of the lorry movements, the numbers, or the roads being used?
No, that is correct,
Thank
Chair.
you. Councillor Sam McLean.
Thank you, Chair. So I picked up on two arguments that kind of stood out to me. One of them is loss of agricultural land. I'm not quite sure if that really is an argument, because it is, as far as I'm aware, there's nothing contaminated will be left behind by these solar farms, so they could just be taken away and it could become agricultural land again. Also, the impact on beauty. I went on a site visit today and I didn't really see any outstanding vistas. I didn't see mountains. I didn't see medieval castles. It was just farmland. And primarily farmland has always been an industry. It has always been served a functional purpose for growing food and making money for the farmer. And also, you know, we're not all romantics. Not everyone thinks farms are beautiful. Some people think solar farms are beautiful, which aren't impacting, you know, the natural beauty there, which really in this part of the country, it's the great big skies, but you can see those great big skies in the Sainsbury's car park and Tollgate. So, you know, solar farms don't go that high. So really, I don't see any reason why anyone's objecting, for all the reasons that our officers have explained. There isn't really an argument to object it. And the farmer has to make money in the post-Brexit economy. Who are they going to sell to when we've lost access to the largest single market? So lost free trade to large single market. So I'm going to propose we put this to a vote, and I'm going to be voting for it. Thank you.
Okay, so just a matter of clarity, because you've proposed that we accept it. I'll need a seconder for that proposal. Do we have a seconder for council?
Yeah, I would second that.
You second?
Yeah. I do want to mention a couple of things, but I'll wait until my turn. But I would second that.
Okay, so now we've got the proposal and seconder, but we will carry on the debate. And when we finish speaking, everyone's had a chance to speak. Then we'll go back to your proposal and application. Okay. Would you like to clarify some of Councillor McLean's comment?
Yeah, I think the question was, is it reversible? Yes, it absolutely is. It will be, it is required to be reversible by condition. It is a temporary permission, and it will either be reversed after a year of not producing any power, or after the 40 years if it does produce power for the full term. And no comments made about the landscape. It is I mean, we have policies that protect the landscape for its intrinsic value. So on the NPPF, it is not it's not in an area of AOMB. It's not an area of outstanding natural beauty as we have to the north of the district or in a national park. So it's not got any designation in that respect. But we do have policies that protect the country for its the countryside for its intrinsic value. So that's it. Thank you.
Just on the matter of agriculture, when the 40 years is up, what will the land still be graded the same, or will somebody have to come in, look at it, and see if it has been destroyed or changed by the solar application? How does that happen?
That's a great question. It should be significantly better, because it is left for up to 40 years not being intensively farmed. And I think there's a condition in there towards the end of the SUDS conditions that requires a soil management plan, and we've just discharged one for Leia in conjunction with Natural England and DEFRA, who are have not objected to this scheme because they don't consider it to be the loss, because it is not permanent. But it's number 17. So they have to set out to us a soil management plan which demonstrates how This condition is needed to demonstrate how the soil quality will be preserved and increased throughout the life of the project and will return to the existing or better soil classification once decommissioning has occurred. So that sets out the process in which the soil will be managed while underneath the panels in terms of the planting that is carried out upon it. And in terms of the decommissioning, it all has to come out. The spikes have to come out of the ground. Can't leave anything in the ground whatsoever. So it can be farmed as soon as it is no longer, as soon as we require decommissioning through condition 2, it will be in a position where it should be of a better land classification than it currently is. That's the idea, in effect. Yeah, I mean, in terms of agricultural land classification, there was a note in the committee report that the landowner did make a representation themselves. Just to set out a little bit of context, it's probably worth reading if I can find it. The landowners made a representation and confirmed that the site is capable of growing cereals and some limited vegetable crops. In practice, the land within the site has produced low-grade wheat suitable for biscuits and animal feed, field beans grown for cattle feed, green energy crops, that's rye and maize for anaerobic digestion for biofuel, and potatoes, which have been grown in limited area only for crisps, though he notes these can be grown 1 in 7 years due to crop rotation. He notes that most of the site's crops are sent to Harwich and they're exported overseas with no produce sold locally. Landowner makes note that the site does not give high tonnage returns in respect of crop yields with substantial areas of soils that yield very poorly. He also states that some of the least productive land. He states that there is some of the least productive land within the wider estate. The landowners confirmed that current farming practices include typical agrochemicals such as insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, slug pellets, deboost yields, and managed pests. These are blanket sprayed, whilst necessary for farming, are hugely detrimental to the biodiversity of the area. Invertebrates are eradicated and no longer provide food for birds and small animals, and the lack of diverse weeds impacts the whole food chain. The landowner stated if approved, the proposed development will totally remove the need to use agrochemicals at the site and allow the 40-year fallow period. This in turn will allow greater species diversity at the site and will benefit all levels of the food chain. Now, I can imagine you would say, well, he would say that, but ultimately that's what's been put in front of us. And we must take that as read, that that's how the farm is currently being, how this land is currently being farmed. And it certainly won't need to be sprayed with agrochemicals while it's in either wildflower meadow or hedging, tree planting, those kind of things. So there is a point there.
Okay, thank you, James. Councillor Davison, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We've heard a lot tonight, and for me, it boils down to a simple question, which Mr. Ryan has pointed out on page 67, the last 3 paragraphs, is the weighting process is in the hand of the decision maker, i.e. this committee, between the balance of either having green energy or having high value productive land. I've got some comments to make though. First of all, I note that in your report, Mr. Ryan, that you said they had independent people assessing the grade of the land. Forgive me, but DEFRA did a national grading scheme in the 60s, and it's still accurate. And actually, if you look at the area in particular, it's nearly all blue grade 2. It's not grade 3. And that is highly productive. Secondly, although I welcome the reduced area, but actually this particular estate, the Round estate, and as you know, former MPs and people have been very influential in Colchester over the hundreds of years that they've owned it. But this is only one of 5 that's fully irrigated and farms in Colchester district. It may be poor quality if you don't irrigate, but actually this scheme, there are underground mains across the whole of the estate and still used for potatoes, as he says, every 7 years, which actually are sent to the local co-op as potatoes and or converted into crisps at Fairfield. I know that because we work with Fairfield occasionally. The other thing is that the other crops he grows are a decision taken by the tenant farmer, or actually the contract farmers, just for convenience. And obviously the legumes put nitrogen and goodness back into the ground, and the cereal crops are a break crop effectively from higher value crops. So this is one of 5 high value farms in Colchester. This particular Round family, as I say, have already got permission for 250 acres at Layer, but that is grade 3. It's poorer land. And actually all the other solar farms that we've given permission for so far are on poorer land. There's 250 acres at Layer. Lang and Ho's got 100 acres. Layer Marley's got 50 acres. That's about 400 in total. And we're proposing to put another 110 acres towards that, but on better land. There are so many more thousands of acres in the Colchester district that actually would be more suitable and lower quality land. The other thing that would concern me is that we talk about street scene in the urban environment as being material consideration. So how much is the open landscape a material planning consideration? Because actually what this is actually doing is enclosing an area, not only from the public view, but also from animals. The roe deer roam across this part of Essex quite regularly. They are not herd animals. They go in ones and twos. Effectively, you're forcing those onto the public road to get around this site. I don't think that's a very amenable thing for the animals to have to battle. The other thing I'd say is that this landowner, this will make 350 acres under his control that are potentially solar. Surely that's going to empower NSIP regulations. And why is it that we haven't considered that? Because, you know, the total area under this one ownership does breach those limits. The other item I've got here is, what is the benefit to local communities? I've heard no benefit at all. They're not gaining from the electricity. They're losing the views. They've got the extra traffic and everything else to deal with. And then, of course, we've got the fire issue about batteries. We know we've read over the last year or two about lithium batteries cannot be put out. They are actually, they're terrible. One cell generates another fire into the next cell. And then, of course, you've got all the fumes that would be going downwind. So my concern is that the battery location is to the south of the site. The access to it is to the north. And that means that effectively the fire service and any other emergency services would be coming into the wind, and the fumes would be going downwind. And because of the hedge at the back of the battery bank, the fire brigade cannot get away from those fumes. So I think you need to look at another access, possibly to the south, where there is already a track, whereas at least they would be out of the fumes potentially. But I think the chairman of the parish council made a good point that, you know, there's normally a 5-mile exclusion zone for these dangerous fumes. And in that you've got 5,000 residents and 2 primary schools. And that alone, I know you've got to deal with and sign it off, but that combined with the fact that the land is far better quality than has been stated, and that actually the enclosure of the area ruins the landscape, I think those are very strong reasons for us, on balance, considering that agricultural land should take precedence in this case. Thank you.
Before you do that, I think it's just gone past 8 o'clock. So I think that we've been here for over 2 hours and we did say we're going to take a break. So we're going to have a quick break of 5 minutes. We'll come back with the officer's recommendations. Members, when you're away, please don't discuss this amongst yourselves. You are individuals and you're here to make an individual decision. If you can, please. You're still as in committee, so to speak. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for that. It was surprised to see how many people head to the toilets. We all needed it. So we will carry on now. We have the answers to Councillor Davison's questions, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've been asked to share the plan that Councillor Davison mentioned, so I will do that now. This is the DEFRA Magic agricultural land classification. It is at a very large scale. So it's, I'll show it for you. There we go. That is a huge scale, as you can see. So we are, if this is Colchester, we're around here, I'd suggest something like that. So in the land that is shown on the DEFRA plan as being grade 2. Hence where the assertion that this is grade 2 land comes from. The applicants have commissioned their own agricultural land classification survey. They have literally surveyed the land, and that comes out at a mixture of 3A and 3B, as I previously showed. So, you know, that's a bespoke study, whereas this is obviously a very high level, but that's the plan. And I'm sure Council will come back on that, but that's, I mean, as I said, it is in the hands of the decision maker. What the important point that officers need to make is that we don't have evidence to say that this part of land is 2. We do have evidence, independent evidence to say it is 3 and 3A, sorry, 3A and 3, not 3, it's 3A and 3B. We don't have any evidence, you know, studied evidence to say that it is 2. So a refusal on that basis would be very risky at appeal, because it is difficult to rely on a map of that age, and it was carried out many years ago, and that resolution, it is clearly indicative, and not remote. It would actually be difficult to pinpoint the exact site on this map because it's such a high resolution. I'm sure Councillor will want to come back to me on that. It's absolutely fine. I will happily discuss it further.
I think it's ready to come in. Do you take Councillor Davison now, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to explain that when DEFRA did this soil map, it was done with physical soil samples on each farm, and that's why this is the national map here you've got here. But actually, if you go into the magic maps and make it smaller, you'll get a far more detailed map, and it is still the DEFRA standard map. So I would vouch that grade 2 is absolutely correct.
Okay, and the question I have to ask is, DEFRA have not objected to this scheme, have they?
No, DEFRA and Natural England have not objected to this scheme because they do not consider it to be the permanent loss of land, because it's a temporary mission, and that's the basis on which they have assessed it. So obviously they are also mindful of the need to provide low carbon energy, being the government's guidance on ecological and agricultural matters. So I'm sure they consider that well when deciding whether or not to object. I mean, ultimately they know that if they object, they are likely to be called into a public inquiry to justify why this land is of such significance it cannot be released. So they have clearly chosen not to do that.
So the question, and then somebody interrupt, is if they've gone by their original plan, which we've just seen, which was done in 1969, in the 60s, which they really should do, they look at all that, or have they physically visited this site for this application to say that the grade has changed from what they originally marked it down as? Because that's what it seems to be, but why have they changed their mind?
I don't think they have changed their mind. I think that they are saying that this is a temporary loss of agricultural land, and therefore is not materially harmful enough to outweigh the benefit of the energy that is created. I think it's I haven't seen any evidence that has assessed these fields at a field level, at the level the applicant has shown us. And therefore, I'm absolutely sure that Natural England have not been out on site to assess the quality of the soil themselves, to my knowledge, and I've had no I think that a separate agricultural land classification was conducted on the 3 southern fields because they are tenanted and there was a right of access to do so. I'm not aware that an independent another independent agricultural land classification report has been assessed on the land that is currently within the development zones 1 to 5. So we are taking that level of detail as read ultimately, and on that basis officers cannot recommend a refusal on the basis of the loss of grade 2 agricultural land, because we believe it to be 3A and 3B, so not 3A and 3B. But regardless of that, Natural England have not objected to the scheme in any event because they consider it to be temporary. So that's how they've dealt with the matter effectively.
Okay, if someone wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was just going to state, regardless of whether it's grade 2 or 3A or 3B, there is still a presumption against the loss of the best and most versatile land in preference for land of lower quality. But it's for you to decide, is this a loss or is it just a temporary use of land as the application describes? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Davison, did you actually want to come back, or are you happy with the?
No, I think Mr. Cairns's response just now was absolutely clear. You know, it is absolutely our choice as to whether land or green energy is which is the priority.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Councillor Barton.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to say that I actually don't think this application is anywhere near as simplistic as Councillor Sam McLean seems to suggest. But having said that, it is a delicate balance between protecting rural communities and also recognising that we do have a climate emergency. Now, as a council, we've signed up for that climate emergency and we've guaranteed almost to be carbon net zero by 2030. So we have got to do something. And on the face of it, a solar farm with the potential to generate enough energy to power 12,850 homes does look promising and looks as if that could help us meet our targets. But I'm concerned with what Councillor Ellis was saying, that that energy will not be powering local homes. So I would like some clarification on that. That was number one. Secondly, I read somewhere, not in your report, but I've read somewhere that the National Farmers Union have no objections to this application, which I must say I was a bit surprised about. But can you clarify whether that's true, please? And thirdly, should we turn down this application, I wondered if Mr. Cairns could outline the implications should the applicants appeal, because we need to know what the situation would be. Thank you.
Before we hear that, can I ask people to set their phones to silent, please? It's the same tone that keeps going off, which is a message. There used to be a fine to the mayor's charity. I'm not sure how much it is now, but just set you to silent, please, because we can hear it going off, whoever it is. I'm not looking at you, Sam, but thank you. Over to you, officers.
So thanks. Yes, in terms of where will it go, Process Solar Farm will connect into the UK Power Network substation at Abberton. So that will direct straight into the local electricity distribution network. From then, the main cables run to Colchester, which is us, obviously, but they do also run south towards Mersey, also in our city district. They do then also run to Toshant, Tiptree, also in our district, and Heybridge, outside of our district. Whilst the nature of daily power flows through the network changes frequently, the renewable energy created is highly likely to be used almost entirely by the current households, farms, and commercial sites within our area. Can't guarantee that. Some of it may be in Morden, for example, but it's likely that it will be used in within the Colchester area. It obviously has a benefit in terms of reducing the need to import fossil fuel generated energy from further afield, and does help towards our zero carbon objectives. Absolutely. The National Farmers Union, yes, they have. They were too late to put in the report, but it is on the update sheet. They have supported the scheme. I can read you the full letter if you'd like to hear it. It's not very long. Hold on, I'll dig it out.
Yeah, while we're doing that, can we just go, while you look at that, can we pop over to Simon, because for clarity of councillor Barton's one, this application has the farmers union against, haven't said they're not against it, highways are not against it, DEFRA are not against it. Apart from the local opposition here tonight, is there anybody else involved in that is against this application? I can't see it. But over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, councillor Barton raised the issue of the council's exposure on appeal. And I think that very much relates to what reasons for refusal you would identify as members. Obviously, we are here as officers to support the democratic process. And the recommendation in the report weighs up the planning benefits of the scheme against the harm that's been identified. And the report is clear that the public benefits do outweigh that harm significantly in the opinion of your officers. You've heard this evening from various speakers within the community who believe that the landscape detriment and the potential other impacts that have been identified, including potential highway impacts, potential for fire risk, outweigh those benefits. However, you've also heard from officers who have responded on those very points. It's for you to decide whether you believe that those harms that have been identified genuinely outweigh those benefits. But the advice to you is clear from officers that we do not believe that to be the case. If you were to decide an alternative outcome to this application than that which is recommended, it is imperative that you identify reasons for refusal that can be sustained at appeal. At the moment, as the chair has just indicated, you have very few, if any, statutory consultees raising sustainable objections, including the Highway Authority, the Fire Service, and Environmental Protection. Various levels of harm have been identified, including landscape harm, as has been cited as a consideration. However, conversely, it is possible to see the scheme will have longer-term landscape benefits in terms of tree planting and hedgerow reinstatement. It is a moot point as to what the exact historic landscape character of the area is, as the landscape has continuously changed almost generation to generation. The open landscape we see today, no doubt, would be unrecognizable to people in the 1920s who would be more familiar with enclosed landscapes and hedgerows populated by large mature elm trees, all of which have gone. So it's very difficult to argue that the reinstatement of hedges would be alien, and there would be clear biodiversity net gains, which is a significant positive benefit in favour of permitting the scheme to go ahead. I think, Chair, at the end of the day, we have yet to identify what sound reasons for refusal there could be, and that is for you members to identify in your debate and for us to advise you whether we consider those to be sustainable at appeal. That is for you to decide, but for us to advise you whether we consider them to be evidenced and sustainable. I'm sorry to sit on the fence, but the report is clear what the recommendation is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Can I just show the NFU?
Back to you,
Councillor Barton. Yes. Hold on. So it's got a black mark on it because it's been redacted to take out personal details of the person who sent it, but it's on headed notepaper, NFU to whom it may concern. It's been a long held NFU aspiration that every farmer and grower should have the opportunity to become the net exporter of low carbon energy. Producing land-based renewable energy for on-farm use or to supply others displaces greenhouse gas emissions and is an important part of our net zero ambition for the agricultural sector. Renewable energy, including solar, wind power, bioenergy, makes up 40% of UK electricity production today, and farming is uniquely placed to be part of the solution to tackle climate change. The location of Birch Solar, close to the city of Colchester, which is the fastest growing city in the country, makes a strong geographical fit. The NFU has previously recognised solar power generation on rooftops or ground mounted as an important form of farm diversification, which can yield significant income streams to support profitable agricultural businesses. While a preference is for large scale solar farm development to be located on lower quality agricultural land, this is not always possible. Birch Farm Solar is on a mix of most versatile land and non-BMV land. We note that land for solar farms remains agricultural and may revert in longer term back to other agricultural uses. The NFU has worked with the solar industry, ecological consultants and other stakeholders to develop good practice guidance and ensure that this is followed, enabling true multi-purpose land use as a source of diversification income for farmers at a time of significant uncertainty for our industry. Agriculture has the potential to cultivate new jobs and deliver clean growth, with our diverse farm business producing not only climate-friendly and affordable food and drink, but also renewable sources of energy and fibre, while managing valuable environmental and recreational assets. The NFU supports a recommendation of this project for planning approval. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. It's conclusive. I've never seen a letter from the NFU before. Is it rare that they comment on these things?
We don't have many schemes of a scale that they would be particularly interested in. They didn't comment on Leia, but they did comment on this one. So there we go.
Okay, thank you. We now move on to councillor Sam McCarthy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Barton, as is often the case, because we're all colleagues and we sing from a similar hymn sheet, has asked many of the questions that I was going to. But I want to reiterate why I support the proposal, the application. We've had a bombardment of questions towards James this evening, a lot of them hypothetical, and he has been nothing but reassuring. The applicant have made concessions, mitigations, and again, have reassured me that this is the right thing to do. And two succinct points I want to make. Councillor McLean, Jackie McLean, you mentioned about CBC or CBH and their solar panels. You can't compare the two because this is a private thing. This is not to do with us as a council. And the fact that we're, if we do, and CBH doing that, rolling out solar panels on properties and their assets, but it's a handful of solar panels. It's not on the scale of this. And even, low carbon is saying that it could serve up to 12,000 properties. Even if that's not the case, at worst, it's still going to be several thousand. Again, you can't compare that to what we're doing as council at the moment. The agricultural land, obviously, we've just seen what the NFU has said. I saw this earlier. I've grown up in a concrete jungle all my life. I've survived that. But I don't know anything about farming, so I'm going to take the advice of the NFU on this. And not only have they not objected, they've supported it, stating that the temporary loss of agricultural land is nothing in comparison to the benefit of the solar farm. So I fully support it. I'm pleased that I seconded the proposal, made slightly prematurely, perhaps. But yeah, I still support the application.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I listened very carefully to the remarks of the objectors and the very detailed letter that was read out by Mr. Ryan from CARE. I had some concerns at the time I was listening to those, and I've had a look at the second section of the National Planning Policy Framework, and I can't see anything in there that suggests that what's before us tonight doesn't qualify as sustainable development. I've also looked at the government, the gov.uk website around fire and solar panel investigations and evidence, a report that was produced in May 2018, just to see if there was anything there that raised concerns for me, given some of the questions that were raised about fire safety. I also listened very carefully to what Mr. Ryan said to us about the decision that was taken by Lucy Fraser MP, who at the time was Minister responsible for housing and planning, on the appeal from the Devon. Lucy Fraser is now a member of the cabinet, so her decisions obviously have significant weight at senior government level. I'm just like an answer to the question about potential watercourse contamination should anything happen with the batteries if we have an answer to that. I note that highways haven't made any objections, and whenever there is an application for significant construction, there are always highways implications whilst that construction is taking place. So I don't think this is any different to any other significant development that we're faced with on a regular basis across the city of Colchester. I also note that there are 26 conditions attached to the recommendation for approval. I think that's probably about a record for the applications that I've sat on whilst I've been a member of the planning committee on and off over the years. And that letter from the NFU seemed to, for me, tip the balance in favour of the recommendation that's before us this evening. There are just two other things that I wanted to ask and draw attention of members to. One, Councillor Davison referred to ENIPS, and I've looked through our report and can't find anything that refers to ENIPS or even what ENIPS stands for. So if Mr. Ryan could just illuminate for me and other members, I would be grateful. The final point that I wanted to draw members' attention to is on page 103 of our document, and that is the guidance that has been in our reports for a number of years now about the Supreme Court decision of CPRE Kent and China Gateway International Limited, which lays out quite clearly what, as a committee, we need to be specifying if we are going to go against the recommendation of the officer that's in front of us. And that says full reasons for concluding its view, the various issues that are being considered, the weight that we've given to each factor, and the logic for reaching the conclusion that we have that is different to the recommendation that's in front of us. Thank you, Chair.
James.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, apologies to Councillor Davis. There were 2 points I didn't pick up, which I should have done. I think what he was referring to, well, he said he was referring to, was the NSIP. That's a nationally significant infrastructure project. Basically, solar farms come in two types, really, or large solar farms do. They come in the solar farms that are below the NSIP threshold, which is 50 megawatts. So you get schemes like this for 49.9 megawatts. So our normal planning application or an EIA planning application, such as this one. And then you get solar farms which are over, and they become national significant infrastructure projects. They're determined directly by PINS, the planning inspectorate. They are you don't get many 51 megawatt schemes. They tend to be below the threshold because that's what the threshold is. And then they tend to be significantly bigger. For example, there's one, there are the now quite famous Sunnecker scheme in Cambridgeshire, North Suffolk, which is by a scale of magnitude significantly bigger than this. They're huge. You don't get many in the middle because NSIPs are extremely onerous planning tools effectively and can take many, many months, if not many years, to get through the process. I think the question that Councillor Davison was asking was that if there's a 49.9 megawatt grant scheme, which we have granted in layer, and this one is it was 49.9, is now probably around 40 megawatt scheme, and they share the same cable going to the Abberton station. Is it effectively one scheme and therefore should be determined as an NSIP? Why that's not the case in this instance is because the red line goes all the way to Abberton. The two schemes are completely divisible. I can assure you they don't intend to dig up the road twice because they won't get a license from highways to do that. So the cable will only go as far as the cable run from the new layer substation. But they are intentionally two entirely separate red lines. So they do qualify as normal. I say normal, they are EIA development schemes that can be determined by the planning authority. So they are not, it doesn't tick over the NSIP threshold, basically. Councillor Davison also mentioned what benefit is there to local community. I did forget to respond to that. There is a It's not in the planning, it's not part of the planning system, but there is £112,000 that will be split between Birch Parish Council and Cotford Parish Council for a community benefit fund, which comes with all renewable schemes. So that will be split half between each council, and that can either be a lump sum or paid through the entirety of the project. So there is some financial benefit to the scheme. There's no Section 106 contribution, but this falls outside of the planning system, but there is some community benefit from a financial point of view. Yes, watercourse contamination was noted. I mean, I think as that is clearly an issue for members that members are mindful of, that is something that should be added to the list of items that the fire safety management plan deals with explicitly in its own chapter or section, and then I will consult the relevant parties on that to make sure they are happy with the manner in which that, in the unlikely event that happens, that there are measures in place to ensure that in a firefighting incident, best practice is used to ensure that although some contamination is probably impossible to avoid, it is mitigated to the best of its abilities in the unlikely event of a fire incident. So that would be a suggestion I would like to add to that condition if members consider that appropriate. And the CPRE Kent versus China Gateway is a point that is absolutely correct. If members decide to refuse the scheme, they need full reasons. They need to demonstrate the weight that they are giving those reasons and the logic behind those reasons, and that is agreed. Thank you very much.
Okay, just on, as James has suggested that we add another condition to the conditions, does the proposer and seconder accept that?
What I would do is I'd add an informative on saying that we would expect it's a broad fire management plan, but we are going to say that we want it to include a chapter or a section on that, which is watercourse contamination measures. Thank you.
Do we want to include that? Yes, thank you. And then wait patiently down the end there, Lee, please.
Okay, I'm not going to spend too long lamenting the lack of mountains in Hardy's Green. However, most of my comments have actually been raised, but I just wanted to let you know where I stand and where my thought process is going, which is to decline this application. I have an issue with the public benefit, and obviously James has just clarified that slightly. Still not over impressed. I'd like to know what relevance those drawings have. Now, the reason I mean that of the planning of shrubs, and we've all seen new developments and they have beautiful vistas of trees and other stuff, and then of course you get, as Sam's alluded to, a concrete jungle. So my concern is around. One of my concerns is around the accuracy of those drawings. Would like some or sort of illustrated pictures. I'd like some confidence on that, please. Talking again about the application, the decision made by Lucy Fraser MP, I would like to know how that site in Devon compares with the site we're talking about here. Is it comparable? I add to councillor Jackie McLean's comments about more use of brownfield sites and the anomalies in the land survey, which councillor Davidson has covered, and whether or not this is best and most versatile land. I don't consider 40 years to be a temporary structure, and I've got a couple of issues around that. So one of which is you say about it being temporary, and so it needs to cease power production for a year. One of my concerns is, what does that mean? Where is ceasing? Is it a complete and utter zero production? Is there any kind of threshold? What's to stop this pootling along on a very low benefit, but effectively still producing power? In along the same things as that, the 40-year thing, is there a period, you say it has to return back, for how long? You know, could it return back for 6 months before they pop another 40-year plan in? I'd like some clarity on that. So I've also got concerns around the sales pitch of the sizable contribution to net zero, which was sold to us as a benefit on our climate emergency, not Britain's, at the councils. It's since been clarified it has nothing to do with that. So I think that needs taken into consideration, that really should just be wiped as a statement because it's not relevant. I've an issue with the biodiversity net gain. I think some of those figures are inflated. I'd like proof of those. My biggest concern is we're being asked to approve, and this is not to the detriment at all of the professionalism of the officers. I'm not querying that, but we are being asked to approve this with an awful lot not pinned down. You know, the battery storage, things like that. What type of batteries? The issue raised about water contamination. I accept that we're saying, can you make sure you cover this? But I personally feel that we don't know enough about it to go with it at the current time. So that concerns me. I've talked about temporariness. Councillor Davidson's comments have now been about NSIPs have now been done. Just wanted to draw attention to the report. The NPPF currently states that where significant development agricultural land is necessary, areas of poor quality land should be preferred to those of higher quality, given where the site is so close to Stanway, which was formerly a village and is now a shopping centre. I consider that is in the area there has been significant development. So, and that being that high quality land is necessary. So I feel it should remain as high quality land. That's the end of my list.
Can you turn your mic off, please? Sis, we need to come back on a couple of the items in there and such, please.
Thank you very much. First one was, is Devon comparable? I haven't been to the Devon site. I don't know it intimately. I only drew the comparison because it seemed similar in terms of its assessment of the way in which it was dealt with. I mean, that was 61 hectares of agricultural land, existing field boundaries, hedgerows and vegetation. It's generally undulating, overwhelmingly rural and undulating in character with sporadic housing and small settlements. That had, it was a 49.9 megawatt. It had a BESS like this. So it was really a point made that it's not, I think the point that was being made is that in that instance, it was held to not warrant a refusal of the scheme, although it was, that was something that was cited throughout the appeal process. So it's not, I wouldn't want them to, I wouldn't want to mislead members and consider the two schemes are in any way identical. That was just simply an example of a recent appeal where fire safety, and presumably fire safety can be as a set of batteries sitting within shipping containers. If in that instance the Secretary of State considers that it can be dealt with via in the planning balance, it can only be given neutral weight. It is a reasonable assumption that in this instance, should members decide to appeal this, refuse the scheme on fire safety and consider a fire risk, again, effectively without the technical, while we have the fire service and the HSE not objecting, I think that it would likely be a similar consideration for an inspector that it would be given neutral weight in the planning balance on the basis that it can be dealt with, and is ultimately a technical matter. Ultimately, if it was held to be materially harmful, then there'd be an argument that battery storage is just an unsafe technology, should not be used at all. But that doesn't seem to be the way we are going. Comments about more brownfield sites, I think I covered that. I mean, we agree that brownfield sites are excellent and we welcome them to come forward. Best and most versatile agricultural land, I think we've discussed that in some detail. 40 years not being temporary. There was a, can it pootle? Well, ultimately it could pootle along, yes. Cease power production will be, it no longer generates power to the grid. And if there is a discussion, if there is an allegation that that is happening, I suppose that would be likely to be something that would be raised to our enforcement team, because there was a sense it wasn't being maintained. It just didn't look like, I mean, I suppose you're probably not going to pay someone to window clean all your panels when it is no longer generating power. So I'm sure we would be told, as is often the case with our enforcement team. And then we can seek evidence as to whether or not it's generating power, how much it's generating, and that's a discussion. How long, so yes, 40-year permission or a year of not generating. Obviously, we would be in touch with the developers. Even if it is another developer, we would be in touch with them. They'd be covered by the same condition. We would, however, I mean, I think, they could then have another 40 years pension. Yes, absolutely. There is potential for this scheme to be extended. We get variations of conditions applications. And they may get to, if it's highly productive in 40 years' time, they may, as is their right, make an application to vary the condition to have another 10 years, 15 years, or make it permanent, for example, and it will be assessed as a new ES development and will come back to members, I'm sure. In terms of the climate crisis, yeah, absolutely clear. This is not a city council scheme, but we are a council that has declared a climate crisis, and clearly it is beneficial to the wider net zero ambitions of not only the council but of the national energy mix. So best and most first time was also mentioned. I think we've been through that. I think there was an element of the concern that it is still grade 2. I think, I mean, as Simon said, grade 2, grade 3, grade 3A and grade 3B are all B and V. So it, as has been repeated a number of times now, it is in the decision maker's gift to make that judgment call.
Biodiversity was mentioned.
Oh, sorry, B and V, biodiversity net gain. Yes, so there is a condition that requires the scheme to deliver biodiversity net gain by which will be a management plan. They'll set out how they intend to do it, and that will go back to our in-house, sorry, not our in-house, our contract ecologists for their opinion. So we wouldn't approve a scheme for the biodiversity net gain unless it was at the absolute maximum we could ensure is delivered on site. Oh yes, there was a concern about us not having enough information. Effectively, the indicative drawings demonstrating that it's not been pinned down enough for us to know whether or not the scheme is materially harmful. Officers consider that we do have enough information to make that judgment call. I think from the site visit today, we could tell that a lot of the site benefits from good quality screening already, alongside the additional screening that can be achieved by the landscaping scheme. We feel that we got enough of an envelope of development regarding the substation, batteries and their position, and the panels being of a standard panel typology. I think we can envisage what they are likely to look like. And you've seen tonight, you've seen photo montages showing something that they may well look like. We think that there is enough information, and the manner in which the application is made is acceptable in that manner, exactly as we did at Leia. Yeah, I think water contamination, we've suggested that it could be dealt with by that condition.
That was it, huh?
I think that was it.
So I've got 3 more speakers, and then I'm going to move on to our proposal we'll have. So, Councillor Chapman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. A very interesting evening, actually. Thanks to everybody for their contributions. It's been an interesting debate, I find. As a rural councillor, I have great sympathy with what's been said by the community in the area, and the ward councillors here. I have to weigh up whole matters for us and reach a conclusion. 2 or 3 quick things I just want to say. I mean, I think that the changes that have been made to the scheme by the applicants have diminished some of the issues and concerns that have been raised. I was at a meeting the other day where the police, fire and crime commissioner was speaking. He's making an interesting point about the fact that fire service is doing so much work in prevention these days. They're very risk averse, and the number of fire incidents have gone down. So I have every confidence that they will look at this application in great detail to ensure that their record on that continues. So I was very encouraged to hear what they were doing. So I don't see that as a issue. I think they will come back with a very good advice and comments on that. Energy production, I do think we need a balance on that, which I think has been said, between how we generate part renewable energy in the future. And I think, unfortunately, probably some of it does have to be generated on greenfield sites. The other point really is about one we've just been talking about. I wanted to ensure that the biodiversity plans, the screening, all that sort of thing. What always concerns me on these things is how they are monitored going into the future. If you get a sort of sudden drought, all these things will die. And I just wonder how we can ensure that they are maintained at the level that we'd expect them to be on those photo montages. So quick comment on that, I'd appreciate. And I really think my final point really is that the big issue for me is on this point on the quality of the land. I think I've probably made up my mind which way I'm going on this, but that I think is probably the definitive thing for me to make my decision on. So thank you, Chairman. If I could just have that quick on how we are going to maintain the screening, etc.
James, screening.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's condition 14. It was a biodiversity enhancement strategy for protected and priority species. Sets out the requirements for implementation and phasing, and as criterion F, details of initial aftercare and long-term maintenance needs to be set out in that, so we can enforce against the provision of any measures for biodiversity enhancement. We also have the landscaping condition. Effectively, it's twofold. We have a landscaping condition which we can also enforce against in terms of much of the on-site biodiversity net gain will be dealt with via in tandem with the landscaping. So we will, and condition 8, which is a landscape management plan, is actually quite a detailed document that comes in setting out exactly what landscaping is going to go in and how it's going to be, when it's going to go in, how it's going to be monitored. That is actually a standard condition I put in there. It doesn't need to say other than small privately owned domestic gardens, because there aren't any. So I'll take that out if that's okay with members. But it does need to say for all landscape areas. So we have 2 conditions that will ensure that the landscaping and ecological enhancements will be secured on site. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie, please.
Thank you. Just quickly, if you could clarify, if this site is turned into an industrial area through the solar panels, which will be generating electricity, and they're not being farmed, this site will not be farmed, will it be in class as industrial or still agricultural? Because there'll be a big change, because if that changes, it'll take it out of farming. And will this site be put back into farmed land? But I mean, after 40 years, would it be useful to put it back? We're never going to have a crystal ball to know what's going to happen. But once this is taken out, it will then be classed as industrial for then major development. It could then go into if it doesn't work.
No, in short, no. Its use will be as a solar farm. It will still have the agricultural land underneath it. There's a condition to require it to be turned back to agricultural land within either a year of no power or within 40 years. It's a temporary permission. This does not mean that it could in the future become a housing estate anymore or an industrial facility any more than anywhere else in the council's rural areas would be. We would not view this as a industrializing in that respect. And if a future application came in to apart from for agricultural purposes. Say that, for example, say this application was approved, but it decided not to be implemented. It would not be it would be a material consideration in its planning history, but it would not mean that they could alternatively turn it into an industrial site or a housing site or something like that. In terms of, it would need a planning application, and it would more than likely be refused because it is not a sustainable location for dwellings, for example, or for a large industrial site. Say a B8, storage use, for example, like that. So the answer is no, it will return to agriculture and is conditioned to be so.
Councillor Davison, you had your name to the.
Yes, Chairman, all it was, I was trying to get the rest of my points and answered because obviously we had the break after I'd given my presentation. So they've now been answered. But I would just say that, repeat, if you don't mind me saying so, that this is one of 5 farms that is intensively irrigated and able to produce top quality crops. Most land isn't, and I just feel that this is a decision that we have to take seriously. And at the end of the day, solar panels can go anywhere. Most of the land is poorer quality. And I just think that on balance, I will be supporting agricultural land and that particular farm's ability to produce really good crops.
Thank you. And then we'll just, I actually totally agree with you with that. It is a real concern that we need an alternative energy for this country because of the way things are going and whatever could happen in the east of Europe, being held to blackmail by Russians and whoever, and we have to rely on them for our energy. But if we're going to start losing agricultural land in this country to provide energy, we're going to be losing the process of delivering food for everybody, and we also get a lot of that from Europe and the rest of the world. So it is a worry, and I think that governments, no matter what colour, they should look at it first and look at the fact that they need to put solar panels on every house that's being built in the future, every property, shed, you name it, so that the residents can have the benefit of that. I mean, as you know, part of my ward is Roe Hedge. I would love to see an application that would deliver properly to the residents of the local area, that they've got to put up with all of this building and construction in their countryside. But they should be getting more benefits. It should go back to the local residents first and then on to the grid afterwards. It's a bit like a 1/6 payment. They just give you a playground area and then you have to accept hundreds of houses. But something should really change. And I think it's beyond our powers. But those members of the policy panel here at the council, we should change our policy here. And you should set a policy to the planning committee to say that should happen first. If there's houses around, get the applicant to put the panels on top of the house that hasn't got the panels there in the first place. It's a pain for the construction, but then the residents suffer in the end. So I'm very sympathetic. I think we all are to where we are tonight. Everything is against us in this because nobody's objected to the application where we are. We have no powers to reject this application. It does worry me about the fire and the batteries, but we have the condition put in place that there will be a final inspection by the fire service in that. And if there is something wrong, then they will pick it up and it'll come back to the planners and it could be rejected. I also worry about the 40 years time that they will turn around and do that. But as we are tonight, we are where we are, I'm afraid, and something needs to change in the past. However, we do have a proposal and a seconder to approve this application with some added conditions. I think there was, James, you wanted to add? do we need to put a condition in to protect that land after 40 years from going back? So that we make sure it goes back to agricultural land and it's guaranteed not to have more solar panels up there.
I mean, you do have a condition. The condition 2 does require that. What I can't guarantee is that that won't be varied at any point in the future. 40 years is obviously a long time, and the applicants have the right to vary that condition, or this applicant or another applicant in 30 years' time, for example, may decide to vary condition 2 to have more time or to make it permanent, but it is conditioned that within 1 year of the site ceasing power production or 40 years of the day of this permission, whichever is the least, the site shall be cleared of all infrastructure and et cetera, et cetera. And we have a methodology that will be followed to decommission the site in its entirety.
Sorry, Chair, just very quickly, can I just clarify? Mr. Ryan suggested that they have the right to vary. I think what he meant was they have the right to bring it back here to vary.
Absolutely. Well, they have the right to make an application, I should have said, and we have the right to refuse it. Absolutely. And it will obviously come to, it will be an environmental statement application. It will come to committee. There is no way officers will be varying that condition without members' consent. Absolutely not.
Thank you for that. It's been, we've been around the gardens for an awful lot around the fields, to be honest. It is a massive application. Sorry for the pun on that. And now we move on to the main bit. It is down for approval. Can I ask all those members who approve this application with the conditions attached as mentioned, please vote, show your hands now in favour.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 7, Chair.
And those against this application?
That's 3. The motion is carried.
Thank you very much, everybody, for turning up. Thanks, everybody, for turning up tonight. I wish you well, a safe journey at home. Thank you, committee.